My girlfriend yelled, "You're holding me back." I said, "Fly free then." I unsubscribed her from my streaming, gym, and let her lease expire. A week later, her friends were messaging me, asking what happened. I, 29M, never thought 3 years of love could evaporate in a single evening. But here I am, staring at my phone as message after message pours in from her friends, all asking the same thing. What happened? The night it all went to hell started like any other Tuesday. I came home from my engineering job at 6:30, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and settled onto the couch next to my girlfriend. She was hunched over her laptop, furiously typing what looked like another job application. The coffee table was littered with rejection letters and printouts of entry-level positions requiring 5 years of experience. She'd been hunting for work in her field for 8 months now, ever since graduating with her master's in marketing. I'd been covering everything: rent, groceries, utilities, her car payment, even her student loan minimums. Not that I minded initially. I made decent money, and I loved her. That's what you do for someone you love, right? But lately, something had shifted. She'd grown distant, irritable, spending more time out with friends I'd never met, coming home with stories about people living these amazing lives in the city. People with careers, people who traveled, people who weren't stuck in our quiet suburban town. That Tuesday, I made the mistake of suggesting we stay in and watch a movie. Maybe order some Thai food, just relax together. We hadn't had a proper date night in weeks. She looked up from her laptop with this expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of frustration and something that looked almost like disgust. She told me she couldn't just sit around anymore, that she needed to go out and network, meet people who could help her career. When I pointed out that she'd been out networking 4 nights that week already, her face flushed red. That's when she exploded. She accused me of wanting to keep her trapped in this dead-end town, of being threatened by her ambition. She said I was holding her back from her potential, that I was too comfortable with mediocrity to understand her drive. The words came fast and sharp, each one designed to cut deeper than the last. I sat there, absorbing every accusation, feeling something cold settle in my chest. When she finally paused for breath, I asked her quietly if that's really how she saw me, as some anchor dragging her down. She didn't hesitate. She said yes, that she needed someone who could elevate her, not someone content to live paycheck to paycheck in suburbia. She said she needed space to figure out what she really wanted. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was the one paying for everything while she figured out her life, but somehow I was the one holding her back. I looked at her standing there, chest heaving from her outburst, looking at me like I was some stranger who'd disappointed her. 3 years of memories flashed through my mind. Lazy Sunday mornings, inside jokes, the way she used to curl up against me during movies, how she'd cried in my arms when her dad was in the hospital. But all I saw now was someone who'd grown to resent me, someone who'd been keeping score of everything I apparently wasn't. So I told her she was right. If I was holding her back, she should fly free. The words came out calmer than I felt. I told her she deserved to chase her dreams without anyone weighing her down, that she should go find someone who could give her the life she wanted. For a moment, she looked surprised, like she'd expected me to fight or beg. Then her expression hardened into something that looked almost like relief. She said she thought that was best too, that we'd both be happier this way. She went to pack a bag, saying she'd stay with a friend for a few days while we figured out the logistics. As I listened to her moving around the bedroom, gathering her things, I felt that cold feeling in my chest expand into something sharper. After she left, I sat in the sudden silence of our apartment, my apartment, technically, since the lease was only in my name, and really thought about our relationship for the first time in months. When had I become the villain in her story? When had my love and support become chains? I thought about all the times I'd encouraged her dreams, drove her to interviews, celebrated her small wins, and comforted her through rejections. I remembered covering her share of expenses without complaint, taking care of everything so she could focus on her job search. I'd been proud of her ambition, had wanted nothing more than to see her succeed. But somewhere along the way, I'd become the problem. That night, I made a decision. If she wanted to fly free, I'd make sure there was nothing tethering her to the ground. I started with the streaming services: Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, Spotify Premium. All the accounts she used daily were under my name and credit card. I went through each one methodically, removing her profile, changing passwords. If she wanted independence, She could start by paying for her own entertainment. Next was the gym membership. The fancy boutique fitness place downtown that cost me an extra $150 a month. She'd insisted it was essential for her mental health and networking. Apparently, a lot of young professionals worked out there. I called them first thing Wednesday morning and had her removed from my family plan. Her car insurance was bundled with mine for the discount. I contacted my agent and had her moved to her own policy, effective immediately. The phone plan was trickier since we'd just upgraded and were locked into a contract. But I downgraded her line to the most basic package and removed the international calling she used to chat with college friends who'd moved abroad. But the real kicker was the apartment lease. See, here's what she'd forgotten in her rush to blame me for all her problems. The lease was up for renewal in 2 weeks, and only my name was on it. She'd moved in after I'd already been living there for a year, so we'd never bothered to add her officially. The landlord had been fine with it as long as the rent was paid on time, which it always was, by me. I'd been planning to renew automatically, maybe even look for a bigger place for us. But if I was such an obstacle to her dreams, why would I want to keep her trapped in this suburban prison? I called the landlord and told him I wouldn't be renewing. He was disappointed. I'd been a model tenant, but understood. I had 30 days to move out. The beauty of it was, I'd already been thinking about relocating closer to the city for better job opportunities. My current commute was an hour each way, something I tolerated because she'd loved our neighborhood. But if she was leaving anyway, why was I staying? I started looking at apartments closer to downtown, places that would cut my commute in half and give me access to a better dating pool when I was ready. Within 2 days, I'd found a perfect one-bedroom loft in a converted warehouse. More expensive, but manageable on just my income, and exactly the kind of place I'd always wanted but had compromised on for her comfort. By Friday, I'd put down a deposit and scheduled movers for the following weekend. She'd been texting me throughout the week about picking up more of her stuff, asking about bills, casual messages that suggested she expected everything to continue as normal until she decided what she wanted. I kept my responses brief and practical. When she asked about the electricity bill, I told her I was moving and she'd need to set up her own account if she planned to stay. When she mentioned her gym class, I simply said she'd need to handle her own membership now. I don't think it really sank in until the weekend, when she came by to grab some clothes and found me packing boxes. She asked what I was doing, and I explained that I was moving. The lease was up, and I'd decided not to renew. She went very still, asking where that left her. I reminded her that she'd said she needed space and independence. This was me giving her exactly that. She tried to argue that she hadn't meant immediately, that she'd expected time to figure things out. But I told her I'd given this a lot of thought, and I realized she was right. We wanted different things, and it wasn't fair to either of us to keep pretending otherwise. The panic in her eyes was almost satisfying. Almost. She asked where she was supposed to live, and I suggested she figure it out the same way any independent adult would. Maybe one of those successful friends she'd been networking with could help her out. That's when she finally understood that I wasn't playing games or trying to win her back. I was actually letting her go, completely and permanently. She left without taking anything else, and I finished packing in peace. Update 1. The messages from her friends started on Tuesday, exactly a week after our breakout. The first was from her best friend since college, asking if I was okay and what had happened between us. She said my ex seemed really upset and wasn't giving clear answers about the situation. Then came her workout buddy from the gym, surprised that my ex was asking to borrow her membership guest passes. Apparently, my ex had told her there was some billing error that needed to be sorted out. By Wednesday, I was getting texts from 3 more people in her circle, all with variations of the same question. What happened? I kept my responses simple and honest. I told them we'd broken up, that she'd said she needed space and independence, and that I'd respected her wishes. When they pressed for details, I explained that she'd felt I was holding her back from her dreams, so I'd made sure that was no longer an issue. The best friend called me directly Wednesday night. She told me my ex was staying on her couch, but that it was only supposed to be temporary. She'd been expecting my ex to work things out with me and move back home. I explained that there was no home to move back to. The lease had expired, and I'd relocated for work. There was nothing to work out. She sounded genuinely confused, saying my ex had given her the impression that this was just a small fight that had gotten blown out of proportion. I asked her what my ex had told her about our breakup. According to the friend, My ex had said we'd had an argument about her job search, and that I'd gotten jealous and possessive when she wanted to spend time networking. She'd painted herself as the victim of my insecurity and controlling behavior. I felt that cold anger flare up again. Even now, even after everything, she couldn't take responsibility for her choices. I told the friend the truth. I explained how I'd been supporting my ex financially for months while she job hunted, how I'd encouraged her dreams and ambitions every step of the way. I told her about the night my ex had exploded, calling me mediocre and saying I was holding her back from her potential. I explained that I'd simply taken her at her word. If she felt trapped by our relationship, the solution was obvious: end the relationship. The friend went quiet for a long time. Finally, she asked what my ex was supposed to do now. I told her that wasn't my problem to solve anymore. My ex was an adult with a master's degree who'd told me she didn't need me. Now she had the chance to prove it. The friend tried to convince me that my ex had just been frustrated and hadn't meant what she'd said, that everyone says things they don't mean when they're stressed. But I asked her a simple question. If someone tells you repeatedly that you're the problem in their life, that you're holding them back from happiness, why would you fight to stay in that position? She didn't have an answer for that. Update 2. 2 weeks later, the messages took on a more desperate tone. My ex's friend was texting me daily now, explaining that the couch situation wasn't working out long-term. She had a small studio apartment and a boyfriend who was getting tired of the arrangement. She asked if my ex could stay in our old place until she got back on her feet. I had to explain again that there was no old place. The lease had ended, and the landlord had already rented it to someone else. Even if it were available, I wouldn't be paying for it. She asked if I could help my ex with a deposit for a new place, just as a loan. After all, we'd been together for 3 years. That's when I realized my ex still hadn't told her friends the full truth about our financial arrangement. They had no idea I'd been supporting her completely for the better part of a year. I told the friend that my ex would need to solve her housing situation the same way everyone else did, with her own money and credit. If that was a problem, maybe she should focus on finding any job, not just the perfect career opportunity. The friend accused me of being cruel, saying that my ex was going through a hard time and needed support, not abandonment. I asked her why my ex's hard time was my responsibility, especially after being told I was the source of her problems. I pointed out that I'd been supporting someone who resented me for it, and that didn't seem healthy for either of us. Around this time, I started hearing through mutual acquaintances that my ex was telling people I'd kicked her out with no warning, that I'd suddenly turned vindictive and cut off all her accounts out of spite. The story she was spreading painted me as an abusive boyfriend who'd used financial control to manipulate her, and when she tried to assert her independence, I'd retaliated by making her homeless. It was interesting how she'd revised history. In her version, she was the victim of my controlling behavior, not someone who'd spent months telling me I wasn't good enough for her ambitions. I decided to stop being quite so discreet about the truth. When people asked me directly what had happened, I started being more specific. I told them about the months of financial support, the gradual shift in her attitude toward me, and the final night when she'd made it clear that I was an obstacle to her happiness. I showed a few people the text messages she'd sent me in the days after our fight, the ones where she'd talked about needing to find someone who could match her energy and help her build the life she deserved. Word spreads fast in our social circle, and soon people were getting both versions of the story. The truth was somewhere in between, I suppose, but the facts were verifiable. I had been supporting her financially. Several friends had witnessed this over months of group dinners where I'd quietly picked up her share of the bill. She had been increasingly critical of our lifestyle and my lack of ambition. Others had heard these complaints during girls' nights and casual conversations. Most importantly, she had told me I was holding her back and that she needed space to figure out what she wanted. I had simply given her exactly that. Update 3. A month after our breakup, my ex finally contacted me directly. She asked if we could meet for coffee to talk. She said there had been misunderstandings and hurt feelings on both sides, and that maybe we could work things out. I agreed to meet, mostly out of curiosity. I wanted to see if she'd developed any self-awareness during her crash course in independence. She looked tired when she walked into the cafe. The confidence and restless energy that had driven her to blow up our relationship seemed diminished. She'd been staying with different friends on a rotating basis, she told me, while looking for both a job and an affordable place to live. She'd finally accepted a position that wasn't in her field, retail management at a clothing store in the mall. It wasn't what she'd planned, but it was income, and she needed to establish financial independence. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. She apologized for the things she'd said that night, admitting that she'd been taking her frustration out on me when I wasn't the real problem. She said she'd been feeling lost and scared about her future and had lashed out at the person closest to her. I listened to her explanation, her request for a second chance, her promise that things could be different now that she understood what she'd lost. But here's the thing. I'd been doing fine without her. My new apartment was exactly what I'd always wanted. My commute was shorter, my social life had improved, and I was saving money every month instead of stretching to cover two people's expenses. I'd started dating again and remembered what it felt like to be with someone who appreciated rather than resented my presence. More than that, I'd realized something important during our month apart. I'd been happy to support her when I thought we were building a life together, when I believed she saw me as a partner in her dreams. But once she'd made it clear that I was a burden rather than a blessing, that dynamic had become toxic. I told her I appreciated her apology and that I hoped she found what she was looking for. But I wasn't interested in resuming our relationship. She asked why not, if I accepted that she hadn't meant the things she'd said. I told her that I believed she had meant them, at least in that moment, and that those feelings didn't just disappear because the consequences had been unpleasant. She had genuinely seen me as an obstacle to her happiness, and that wasn't something I could unsee or forget. I explained that I'd spent the past month really thinking about our relationship, and I'd realized that her resentment hadn't appeared overnight. It had been building for months, showing up in small comments and subtle criticisms that I'd chosen to ignore because I loved her. She'd grown to see my contentment with our life as complacency, my support as enabling, my love as a limitation. Those weren't misunderstandings or temporary frustrations. They were fundamental incompatibilities that had finally surfaced. She tried to argue that people could change, that she'd learned from this experience and wouldn't take me for granted again. But I asked her a question that I'd been thinking about for weeks. If she'd gotten her dream job offer the day after our fight, if some company had offered her everything she wanted, would she have come back to me apologizing? Her silence was answer enough. I told her I hoped her new job worked out, and that she found someone who could give her the life she wanted. But that person wasn't going to be me. She asked what was supposed to happen to everything we'd built together. I reminded her that she'd been the one who decided our relationship was holding her back. I just listened and acted accordingly. As I walked back to my car, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not just about ending the conversation, but about the whole situation. She'd been right about one thing. We had wanted different things. She'd wanted someone who could elevate her, who could match her ambition and help her climb to whatever heights she'd imagined for herself. I'd wanted someone who could be happy building a life with me, who saw partnership as addition rather than limitation. We'd both be better off finding people who shared our values, even if it had taken this painful detour to figure that out. The friends stopped messaging me after that. I assumed they got the full story eventually, or maybe they just moved on to other drama. I heard through the grapevine that she'd found a studio apartment she could afford and was doing okay at her retail job. Someone mentioned she'd started dating one of her coworkers, a guy who was apparently very ambitious and career-focused. I hoped it worked out better for both of them. As for me, I'd learned something valuable about the difference between supporting someone's dreams and enabling their resentment. I'd learned to listen when people tell me who they are and what they think of me, even when I don't like what I'm hearing. Most importantly, I'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone go, especially when they've made it clear that holding on is hurting you both. She'd wanted to fly free, and I'd given her exactly that. The fact that she'd discovered freedom was harder and lonelier than she'd expected wasn't my problem to solve. Sometimes the best revenge is simply stepping aside and letting people face the natural consequences of their choices. She'd told me I was holding her back, so I'd stopped. She'd told me she needed independence, so I'd given it to her. The fact that she discovered she preferred dependence only after losing it wasn't irony. It was justice. If you liked this story, please like and subscribe us. Thanks in advance.